Hello, you're watching Eye on Africa. I'm James Creedon. These are the headlines from across the continent this evening. In Gabon, the former chief of staff to President Ali Bongo and 2 ministers in the energy sector were arrested on Tuesday in a widening investigation into graft. We'll bring you all the latest on a crackdown on corruption in the West African country. And as the latest UN climate conference kicks off, pressure is increasing on Nigeria to tackle the toxic process of gas flaring in its oil industry. We'll take a closer look at how the problem might be tackled. And Robert Mugabe has left a fortune of over $10 million behind him. How do Zimbabweans feel about the wealth amassed by the deceased former president? We'll talk to our correspondent in Harare. Thanks for watching France 24. Now we start in Gabon, where an anti-corruption probe has led to a host of arrests in the West African country, the latest being the former chief of staff of President Ali Bongo. He was questioned by police along with 2 former energy ministers. In total, nearly 24 people have been ousted from office, arrested or given other duties in a crackdown on graft. But how independent is the probe? Some say it might be politically motivated. Maud Julien has the story.
He is the latest target of Gabon's anti-corruption drive. Brice Lacruche, once a very powerful figure, was dismissed from his post as the president's chief of staff last month and appointed head of a ministry with no real power. On Monday, he was fired.
Devant l'impatience des Gabonaises et des Gabonais.
Given the emergency of the situation and the need for the Gabonese men and women to see an improvement in their living conditions, the President has asked me to put forward an effective team made up of experienced men and women who are competent, loyal, and have integrity.
Compétence, intégrité et loyauté.
Nearly 24 people have been ousted from office, arrested or given other duties, including the head of presidential communications, who was regarded as Lacruche's right-hand man. They're suspected of embezzling public funds, extortion and money laundering. Brice Lacruche's lawyers say the real motives of the arrest are political and that the judicial process is flawed.
This really is a witch hunt. It's a real political vendetta by those in power. There's been no investigation, the offences are not clearly laid out, they've hardly been laid out at all. And during the investigation, the magistrates have been changed in order to facilitate this political vendetta, and that is very worrying.
The pro-government daily L'Union reports that more than 129 million euros have gone missing from the funds of Gabon Oil Company, a state firm run by Patrici Tanasha, who's close to Lacruche.
Now, it's dubbed the COP25. The latest UN climate change conference has opened in Madrid. Nigeria, as the biggest economy in Africa, is under pressure to confirm its commitment to reducing greenhouse gases. Particularly in the spotlight is gas flaring. That's the process of burning gas from oil wells during extraction. It's cheaper than alternative disposal methods, but despite being officially banned since 1984, flaring continues, with companies preferring to pay fines. Now, this despite major health and environmental risks. Moise Gomis reports.
In his classroom, a stone's throw away from the Niger Delta, this teacher is forced to shout to cut through the noise that's distracting her students. Less than 500 metres away, the excess natural gas from an oil production site is flared as it's released into the atmosphere because there's no facility to store it.
The pupils in this school, they almost fell sick, probably because of this gas. Almost, and now that the school is in section, each and every time I used to carry them to the hospital, one sickness to the other.
Flaring or burning escaped gas from oil refineries is a big contributor to climate change and impacts the environment by releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. In 2018, Nigeria burned 8 billion cubic metres of gas, 3 times less than 15 years ago. But ambitious plans are in the pipeline to flare zero gas by 2030. It's one of the pledges Nigeria signed at the COP21 in Paris. The country already sells the natural gas from 178 different sites instead of flaring it.
We designed in our request for proposal package, investors coming to play in the NGRCP must have what we call social performance community development plan for the communities that have suffered this gas flare situation problem for the past 60 years.
Nigeria has the biggest proven natural gas reserves in Africa. The government's warned it will withdraw companies' oil permits if they continue to flare gas without permission. A threat that worries the Nigerian Gas Association, an umbrella group for multinationals and local operators.
Many of our members were already doing several things to make sure they're flaring down. They're doing a lot of gas expansion projects, even without having, the kind of regulatory backing, sanctity of contract, things that will give investor confidence.
As for now, residents in the Niger Delta continue hoping pollution from the country's future energy projects won't cause any disruption to their daily lives.
Next to the Sudanese capital, Khartoum, where 23 people have died in a huge explosion that tore through a tile factory. 130 others were injured in the blaze, some of them critically. According to the government, the fire started when a gas tanker exploded while cargo was being unloaded at the factory. Several industrial accidents have taken place in Sudan in recent months, raising concerns about the adequacy of health and safety regulations. Now, 3 months after his death, part of the estate of former Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe has been made public. Mugabe had accumulated $10 million deposited in one bank account. He's also reported to have left houses, cars and a farm. But he did not make a will. Now, news of his assets has angered many Zimbabweans who have suffered decades of economic mismanagement and are currently dealing with another economic crisis. Now, earlier we spoke to our correspondent in Harare, Ryan Truscott.
I find it surprising that he owned so much. Of course, Mugabe himself never wanted to admit that he was rich. Shortly after he was ousted in 2017, he complained about his pension and retirement benefits. He said he didn't have enough money to maintain his palatial Harare home, known as Blue Roof. And let's not forget that on the basis of what Mugabe claimed was his lack of means, the government of President Mnangagwa paid all of his medical bills this year in Singapore when he was in hospital between April and his death in September. What Mugabe has left behind really does show the great divide that exists between the political elite in Zimbabwe and the vast majority of Zimbabweans. Just today, the UN Food Agency said it's preparing to feed more than 4 million out of more than 7 million Zimbabweans who are currently in need of food aid. So the contrast between these figures and Mugabe's wealth is huge.
Now, Ryan, we can use our imaginations, but do we have any concrete information about how Robert Mugabe managed to amass so much money?
Well, actually, there's speculation that he actually had more than was stated, that this list of assets, which was published in state media today, isn't complete. Because when Mugabe was in power, there were reports that he and his family members owned as many as 13 farms. Mugabe's wife, Grace, had a reputation for going on lavish shopping sprees. His 2 sons led flashy lifestyles in South Africa. And according to WikiLeaks, a US diplomatic cable in 2001 suggested the former president had assets worth around $1 billion, although that was never proven. But Mugabe's lawyer, Terence Hussein, has today downplayed these reports of astonishing wealth. He says that the estate hasn't been finalized and that some of the properties listed in the High Court aren't actually in Mugabe's name.
Now, to Uganda next, in an effort to remove the stigma of the HIV virus. Innovations in medicine mean those receiving ongoing treatment live normal lives and cannot transmit the disease, but ignorance about the risks of HIV remains widespread, and that's what Uganda's Y+ beauty pageant is hoping to change. One participant in the pageant who made a suicide attempt five years ago due to depression linked to her diagnosis spoke to her colleagues at Agence France Presse. Let's take a listen.
Today, Ruth Akulu walks with confidence and a broad smile, but she's been on a long journey to arrive to this point.
I suffered from depression and anxiety for a very long time. This almost took me to the grave. But I discovered who I am, and that there is much more to life than just living with HIV.
Ruth grew up in this children's care home 16 kilometers from Ugandan capital Kampala. Her teenage mother could not take care of her. For reasons they did not understand, she repeatedly fell ill. At the age of 9, when she entered the children's home, she was confirmed as HIV positive. But she was not actually informed of the diagnosis until she was 13. Her childhood came to an abrupt end.
I would get really depressed and I withdrew from every activity, whether at church or with my friends. They could come and say, Ruth, let's go out. I don't go out. I just stay in my room and cry.
Lacking adequate support, she tried to end her life. The Ugandan network of young people living with HIV and AIDS organized the Y+ beauty pageant to help HIV-positive youth break the silence. The United Nations reports that in 2018, there were 1.4 million people living with HIV in Uganda, with 53,000 new infections. And prejudice towards these people is deeply rooted in Uganda.
We got parents that really still had a belief that if your young person is living with HIV or they contract HIV, there's no meaning of paying school fees for them. And that is really very sad. That is really very bad.
Events like this are trying to help young people with HIV regain some of their self-confidence and challenge those who are prejudiced against them.
That's all for this edition of Eye on Africa. Thanks for watching.